Nearly 30 years ago, the town of Martensville found itself in the middle of a living nightmare.
Tonight, another child witness identifies.
Today marks 1 year since the Martensville sexual abuse scandal.
Police were investigating allegations of terrible crimes centered around a local home daycare. It was believed that an underground satanic cult had been preying on the children, forcing them to take part in gruesome rituals. But it would turn out it was all caused by a kind of mass hysteria. It came to be known as the Satanic Panic, and that's the subject of a new CBC Uncover podcast launching today called, of course, Satanic Panic. Dan Zakreski is one of the people featured in the podcast. He was a reporter in Saskatchewan when the panic hit. Dan, what exactly happened to trigger the Martensville nightmare?
Well, Sam, this all began with a mother who became suspicious about a rash on her child's bottom. The child was going to a daycare in Martensville, and the mother was concerned that the rash may be indicative of a sexual assault. By the time she complained and the investigation peaked in about June of 1992, 9 people were facing more than 180 charges. And a couple of years later, when it had worked its way through the court system, it ended up with 2 convictions against one person who had had nothing to do with the original investigation.
So what do you remember about that time?
You know, I cast my mind back there, and I think one of the dominant memories I have is just this feeling that everyone was pulling together. You had media, you had police, you had courts, you had social services, you had justice, and we were all fighting the same thing. We believed we were engaged in a battle over good and evil. It was Satanists. It just couldn't get any more dramatic than that. Journalistically, when I think about it, it was never a question of if something bad was happening. The real question was how bad was it and how far would it go?
So Dan, all that being said, did we learn anything from the experience?
Well, speaking for the journalistic crowd here in town, of whom there are still some people reporting, I think it just gave a whole generation of journalists a healthy skepticism towards institutions and believing received wisdom. This was something that had just gotten out of hand because we weren't doing due diligence. We just got so caught up in what the story was. And I think secondarily, it also really informed how sexual assaults are covered. A lot of people came out of that realizing that in many cases the charge is the conviction. In the case of Ron Sterling, who is the central figure in this, he was frog marched across his front lawn in front of national TV cameras and his neighborhood. You don't ever get that back. So I think in the wake of Martensville, when people cover sexual assaults, they're very sensitive to naming somebody and sort of the details that are released, because the consequences can be catastrophic and are still felt today for many of the people involved.
Dan, thanks so much for this.
You're welcome, Sam.
The CBC's Dan Zakreski in Saskatoon. He appears in the latest season of the CBC podcast Uncover, which launched today. You can find it on the CBC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Uncover Satanic Panic.